Welcome to Property Matters on Dublin South FM. You can contact the show on Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your host for today is myself, Carol Tallon, and first up to join us remotely, of course, is Rose Barrett, co-founder of Grow Remote. Rose, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Carol, thanks so much for having me.
Rose, I have been a fan and a follower of Grow Remote for a while now, but for anybody who isn't familiar with the social enterprise, you might just tell us a little bit about Grow Remote.
Absolutely love to, Carol, thanks. So Grow Remote started as an idea among a group of people who were very focused around seeing rural Ireland get a good opportunity. Tracy Keogh, our bright spark that started it all, contacted a load of us in 2018 and we all came together basically wondering what could we do to help our rural communities to do better, and remote working was just coming up time and time again. Also as a group that maybe wasn't being supported or targeted, and there seemed to be a lot of opportunity there. From that then it went on to us having our conference in 2018, and we had this notion where the CSO was telling us that there was about 250,000 remote workers in Ireland, and at the time we thought, gosh, this is really simple. We'll connect this 250,000 people. They'll all share information. What's the biggest challenge for remote workers is isolation. We'll help them come together. They'll get to know each other, and that's that problem solved. Of course, it's rarely ever that straightforward or simple. So over the last couple of years, we've learned, some other stuff that really does need to be helped. Things like a lot of employers have been telling us really, really good quality of candidates in Ireland, but maybe some of the key skills are missing. So we've gone on to develop training courses, both for the skill of remote working and for leading remotely in partnership with IDA Solus and the Lee Shoffley ETB. So we've run a couple of cohorts of those over the summer. And then really at the heart of Grow Remote is our chapters. So everything that we learn about remote working, we put into a box, more or less, and share it out with local leaders. And that means then that the existing remote workers have a support network. Communities are learning how to become remote friendly, and there's an education piece happening around what is remote work, who are the companies that are hiring remotely, and how do you actually get those jobs.
Yeah, Rose, I'm so aware that the conversation, a lot of the terminology you're using, that's just entered our everyday lexicon now since COVID and since the pandemic. So I'm aware that this is really top of the agenda for local areas, for big businesses, for small businesses. But you guys had started this conversation 2 years before the pandemic struck. So what, I suppose, in a way, has the conversation shifted or diluted? Or when I suppose back in 2018, the core values and the core ambitions for Grow Remote, have they been sustained through COVID or have they changed?
Well, yes, overall. So the impact that we want to have is to bring these jobs to our local communities. We want to see, 3 or 4 extra jobs in a town of 1,000 people, and, imagine the amazing impact that will have on the local economy. But also it has sped things up. So it's changed things in certain ways. For us in February, we were still trying to get people's attention. So actually, I thought a really nice example would be Lee Shoffley did a soft launch of the remote work ready course, and there wasn't really a big uptake. And then when the pandemic hit and there was a relaunch of the course in April, there was actually a waiting list. So people just became acutely aware of how important these skills would be and how changed the face of working is going to be. We would have imagined maybe that would have happened over the next 5 years, and that's really sped it up. So there's been both challenges because of this, obviously, and then there's opportunities. And one of the things that we, and very quickly recognized was people are going to equate the type of remote working they're doing right now with what remote working is, and it isn't. So two of the terms that came about it was remote working in a crisis, or suddenly remote is what people were referring to it as. But it's the reality of what we're living in at the moment, and to make sure that both companies and individuals are supported through that is so important.
And that's a really interesting point. I hadn't considered that at all, Rose, that there is almost a danger here that people who find themselves, as you term it, suddenly remote, will think this is what remote working is. And clearly it isn't, because that wasn't the strategy that you guys had put forward, 2 years ago. How much of it, I suppose, a threat is that?
I think it's lessened, and we've seen the change in the conversation from earlier in the year when we went into lockdown initially, where people, and it's great to have open, honest conversations about this. We're struggling, trying to work from the kitchen table with kids and pets and, other halves and everything, not having the stuff in place that they required. Definitely people have, more and more recognized through the conversation we had that that's not how it should be long term. It may be in the shorter term, but we're starting to see a conversation coming up more about hubs. And it's been interesting for us because, we know what we know, but we recognize that not everybody else is aware of what's out there and what's, potential, even down to the language we would use. So we refer to remote working. A lot of people think instantly work from home. But one of the points we would make is remote working isn't necessarily work from home. It might be for some companies and for some roles, or for an individual that it suits. But it's been wonderful to be able to speak to people and say, co-working spaces, digital hubs are an option. And there's so much of the challenge that is happening for people working from home that can be answered in using hubs.
Yeah. It occurs to me that Grow Remote has an absolute powerhouse of a team behind it when it comes to rural development and rural regeneration. Do you want to maybe give us a little introduction to some of your board members and the GM there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, even, so down to Tracy initially, setting everything up, like she came from a community management development role within Bank of Ireland and has been working with rural communities for years. And then we've been really blessed to have John Avoy come on recently as our general manager. Some people may not know that John was the person who brought Men's Shed to Ireland, and what an amazing initiative that was.
Absolutely.
Just stunning. Then within the board itself, like we have Tomás Sheacon, who's CEO of the Western Development Commission, and the work that they've been doing within our region has just been wonderful and so collaborative and so supportive from very early on. We have Renata Coleman, who was the person who brought the Wayfair team here in Ireland remote, and her experience in that end of things has been just a huge benefit to us. And then John Reardon, who's the head of Shopify here in Ireland, and again a really, really strong person on the remote end of things, but also understanding the importance of getting remote right for our communities and for individuals.
Yeah, there's a strong commercial backbone there as well, then, in terms of the expertise and the insights that are being fed into your policy and strategic decision making.
Very much so. I mean, look, we are a social enterprise, and I know sometimes that when people think social enterprises, they can take a bit soft, but we understand that we need it to be financially sustainable. That it needs to be feasible in the long term to really bring back this impact for our communities. And getting that right is so very important. It's looking very, very good. Again, great experiences, you just said there. And plus working with Enterprise Ireland has been a huge benefit to us as well.
Yeah, it's become something of a cliche to talk about how digital transformation across a whole range of businesses, across a whole range of sectors, has really leapfrogged in 2020. So, and you touched on it there, some of the expectations and around culture shifts that need to happen, you might have predicted could take 5 years, which is still quite quick, but that actually they've been achieved probably in the first 5 weeks of the COVID restrictions. That's welcome, and that's a positive in one respect, but it can have some very big downsides. And so, for example, one of the downsides might have been that we did start to misinterpret things like work remote and only see that as working from home. So, like, for example, I'm really surprised because I didn't know about that stat that there's 250,000 remote workers in Ireland. I wasn't aware of that. That's a huge stat. And, similarly, some of the research that Grow Remote and indeed the Western Development Commission were involved in collating and circulating also about remote work showed that I think is it close to 50% of all jobs in Ireland can be done remotely? which again was a figure that really surprised me.
Absolutely. And sorry, I should clarify on that figure. What we actually learned at that time was that probably wasn't wholly true. And again, this is to do with how we decide what a piece of data means. So it looks more like it was actually referring to people who might have had some flexible working within the role as well, which again was a learning for us. And we also thought that it was going to be so easy to find all of these people, and it is far harder in practice. But it's been amazing. I would wish though, and we are seeing some trends in some media where stats and figures have been pulled out maybe without the right context. So even there's a conversation piece now, 80 something plus % of people are saying that remote working is costing them. But one of the things that I was a little bit disappointed with was there was no conversation of how much they're saving. And I know we have work to do, say, on the e-workers allowance, but there are other things in place to support people working from home, and there will be much more coming down the line. The government have been extremely active, and that might not be very obvious to people just yet, because we're not the only ones that have been at this. The Department of Business Enterprise and Innovation, along with some of the other departments as well, have been working heavily on this, and cross-departmental work going on. So I'm very hopeful for how we're placed. Interestingly, I was having a conversation with one of our chapter leads in France in the last few days, and he said Ireland to him is just head and shoulders above what they're doing in France. And the conversation in France is very similar to the UK. They're very keen to get people back to offices and not even looking at whether it's the right move or not, just doing it because they want to.
Okay, I suppose, would you agree with that? Like, do you think that Ireland is where it needs to be?
Of course, I think we could have done more. We could do more. You always feel that way. I feel that on an individual basis. I often wonder, what else can I get out of this week to progress this? But I think we're in a pretty healthy place, but we can't be complacent. I would like to think that the work that we're doing is moving in the right direction. So say 2 core areas for us would be making sure that the workforce have the appropriate skills to do these jobs and do them well, and for it to be a healthy place for them as an individual, as an employee, but also to make sure that the companies, the managers and leaders are skilled as well to do this the right way. And then we have the government coming in with putting appropriate policy in place to make sure that everything is well supported and has the structure it needs.
Okay, and one of the policies we're hearing a lot about is this hub and spoke model. Can you explain, because it's something that we've actually discussed a number of times on the show in different contexts, and I would see it as a positive from a placemaking point of view, because I think it opens up opportunities for people outside of the main economic areas in Ireland. And as somebody who was born and reared on a farm, and I see that as a massively positive thing. In a way, we don't see a lot of rural living supported maybe through the National Planning Framework, in my opinion. So actually on the hub and spoke model, it's something that I welcome, but I'd like to see it not necessarily just in the suburbs of Dublin or around the main commuter towns. I'd love to see it in really rural locations that, as you say, might have populations of under 1,000 people, and if 2 and 3 jobs could be created, it's such a huge difference that could be felt to the community. Will you explain the hub and spoke model from a policy point of view as you understand?
Absolutely, and I'm nodding frantically here because same, Carol. I'm very excited to see this develop further. So I would know most from the Western Development Commission's work on it, but the idea being that you have a digital hub co-working space to support an area, and around that area then you have all the amenities required for the people that are utilising that hub. It also goes a little bit further where the hubs are being connected up as a network of themselves. So, whether you as an individual or a company are able to access hubs all over the country. And it means it's just making it much easier and much more joined up, down to, centralized billing for corporates, that they don't have to be wondering about, how do I do this? Also, another part that's happening along with that is the hubs themselves, the managers are being joined up, and they're learning from each other. They're sharing knowledge and they're sharing best practice. And what they're also discovering is they're learning at a local level what the requirements are for their hub. There might be specific needs that fit very well into the locale, but then they're finding trends that are maybe more regional or national and sharing that back into the network. So we're learning at a much faster rate and also really meeting the needs that are out there on the ground. And I that's so fantastic. Talking to Tomas, he was talking about a particular opportunity that came up within Galway, where they were noticing a lot of women returners. So women who had amazing experience and, like you're talking about people, with fantastic education, have been in the workforce for maybe a decade, had gone on maternity leave and maybe finding some challenge in coming back. And it was through the hubs there that they learned that there were startups with the flexibility to take on somebody part-time, and we're so delighted to get somebody with that level of experience. And it was that, again, through the hub and spoke, pulling in the knowledge, sharing it back out again, just making sure that it's much more joined up and it's actually me on the ground.
Yeah, it must have been a great coup for Grow Remote to be able to appoint a board member who is the CEO of the Western Development Commission. Because one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because I'm curious about, where is the leadership for this coming from? And I don't mean the leadership for Grow Remote. I mean the leadership for Ireland's remote working strategy, because I see a number of players involved. But where is the leadership coming from?
That's a very good question, Carol. We're so ourselves centric. We would obviously be feeding in somewhat. There's, the work that the different regional development companies are doing within government. So I think Tomas now or Tracy would speak much better to that specifically, or John Avoy as well. But I feel like it is a number of organisations working together at the moment.
Yeah, I think, like, from my point of view, what I see online, I'm seeing leadership, but I'm seeing leadership from a policy making point of view coming out from the Western Development Commission, which I think is really strong. And in terms of thought leadership, I'm seeing that in spades coming from Grow Remote, and indeed you referenced your co-founder there, Tracy Keogh, and that's really important because that galvanizes people on the ground, that helps build momentum. But I suppose to enable this to be seen as so much more than a pandemic responsive solution, and actually, something more indicative of how people living and working in Ireland choose to spend their time, for that, I feel like there needs to be some leadership beyond, I suppose, the pandemic responsive stuff. And to me, it's not clear yet where that's coming from, because obviously it'll need to be state, but I don't know which arm of state that will be. And I think that for the longevity of this, it's a really important question to have the answer to.
Absolutely. And to make sure that, again, it's all joined up and that we're pulling in the same direction.
Yeah. And because now we're so deep into the pandemic response, and now we're just after embarking on our second lockdown, and we know that that's ahead of us for the next 5 or 6 weeks, and who knows what happens after that. Are you seeing a shift, in the members or the people that you're speaking to through your new role as community manager in Grow Remote? Are you seeing any shift in attitude? What are the main changes?
There's kind of two camps on that, Carol. So there's the group of people who maybe, discounting the people who already had been remote working, had a good setup and were quite comfortable doing so, and also who had an employer that were well set up for it. The people who maybe had struggled really at the start, had settled into it and discovered it actually does suit them. And that's probably an element of things being figured out in their own circumstances, and also their employer being able to support them. There's also the other group who had, maybe kind of settled into things a little bit in the summer, but coming back into lockdown again has really shown the chinks in their own setups again, like people back to the kitchen table, and not being able to say like that. I mean, the hope for us is we'll see much more people being able to access hubs coming into the new year. But it's definitely a struggle, and it's a conversation we don't want to shy away from. There's no point in saying that this is all sunshine and roses for everybody. It's really tough for some people, and yeah, and it's a, for some it's about having a conversation with their manager and getting stuff in place to make sure that they are well supported. But for others, it may require something larger than that.
Yeah. Again, I think that in terms of remote work, we're probably at very early days, although it doesn't feel like it, because so many of us have been thrown into it so quickly. And by the way, I hadn't heard that term before, suddenly remote, but it's quite a perfect description for where we find ourselves. So I think that's an interesting one. We need to leave it there, but this is definitely a conversation that we're going to return to because it's something that I feel is going to shape the future of Ireland, not just in the urban centres, but particularly in more rural settings. So it's definitely a conversation I want to return to. Rose, thank you so much for joining us today. That was Rose Barrett, co-founder at Grow Remote. We need to take a quick break now. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. So I'm now joined by Lauren O'Reilly, owner of Space Adventure House in Crookstown in Kildare. Lauren, you're very welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks a mil for having me, Carol.
Lauren, I'm delighted because yours is one of the hubs that I've been in a position to visit prior to the latest lockdown. So I was able to visit and have a tour of the facilities. And it's one that I was familiar with, having, visited the area in recent years. So you might just tell us a little bit. Well, I suppose, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get to be in the co-working or hub space?
Well, my background is really not a whole lot to do with co-working or anything like that. My degree is in fashion design, actually. So I'm quite a different field now. I started my career working for Blarney Woolen Mills. So I was primarily a buyer for them, but buyer working with Blarney Woolen Mills was a very kind of loose term. So I worked directly with the CEO there, Frida Hayes, who was nearly almost a mentor to me and kind of showed me how to run a business. They had, let's say, 14 stores, a hotel and some restaurants. So I got experience in all elements of retail, of staffing, locations, fit out of stores, offices, and, a huge amount of travel around Europe for shows and inspiration, which was on the buying side, and a lot of kind of running around, catching buses, and just generally very busy with them. So I worked with them in Cork for 2 years.
Very good.
Yeah, then I moved to Dublin and started working for Primark, which was great. So it was, working with Primark was brilliant, but it was just as competitive and kind of cutthroat as, people hear about the industry.
Right.
The nicknames were interviewed the Hunger Games. So it was supposed to be super competitive when you were getting in the door and that kind of thing. So it was a really amazing time. I worked with them for about 5 years, gave me a really serious work ethic, a thick skin as well, which is great in business.
It's important.
Absolutely, yeah. And just really the work ethic was the real thing. You were 12-hour days, you had a lot of travel, going to a lot of shows, a lot of factories. So it was really brilliant working with them. And as I said, I worked with them for about 5 years. I've always kind of consciously tried, if I could, to work with an Irish company. And I love the idea of supporting Irish companies, bringing business back into Ireland, all that kind of thing. Not possible for everybody, but I really do try and do it myself. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting career path to where you are now. So Space Adventure House, am I correct in calling it, because it is a co-working space, but you do have private offices available as well?
Exactly, yeah. So that kind of the private office, we had 2 private offices in the space, but it kind of, we see especially now that the demand for the private office is growing more, obviously because of the landscape we're looking at now with COVID-19. People want to be in their own private office rather than sharing a space with people. But yet there still is the appetite for, the co-working desk space as well. Maybe it's a little bit affordable for some people. People may not want the commitment of a full office, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting you talk about the demand for private, because that might be an assumption we'd make. But actually it's interesting to hear from an operator's point of view, that's what you're experiencing on the ground? Because at this stage, a lot of the data, talking about people's habits and behaviors on foot of the pandemic, we don't have a lot of information about that. So it's interesting to hear, the reactions that you're getting from people, and in terms of the demand for private space, you opened prior to the pandemic. So does that tally with what people were looking for when you opened first?
No, it probably doesn't. I only had, when I first opened, we had maybe 3 or 4 people in the first month, let's say. So we opened our doors in July. So we've been open for just about 5 months now. So we're still almost like a baby. We're just getting used to it. So
Very
only
good.
one person actually wanted the private office at the time. And I had 3 people kind of floating in and out on the desks. But now I'm definitely finding, as we're going kind of thicker into this pandemic and we're closing down, we're opening back up, people kind of want that space where they can just close the door behind them. Well, I'm finding that anyway in our setting. People want to be able to close the door, store their things, move in and out as they need to, kind of.
Right. And in terms of the members that you have now, are they self-employed entrepreneurs, or are they people who would ordinarily be commuting to, larger offices, maybe in larger urban centres?
Oh, it's really, really varied. So I've probably, let's say, 10 full-time tenants at the moment. So it varies from, I have a student who obviously with universities shut down, or, you can't really get in, access to the facilities. I have a student there permanently. I have someone in sales. I have a startup nutrition company. And then I have like 2 accountants who work for larger companies in Dublin. And I have, unfortunately, she's a gorgeous girl, but a girl who got stuck here after coming home from Australia for 3 weeks. So she's been stuck here for, I don't know, since March. So she's working in the office as well. And someone who said there's no way she could work from home,
Yeah, and so this is somebody who came back to Ireland for a visit and was due back to Australia in March.
She came back to see her mom in March for 3 weeks, and her whole life is in Sydney, everything, and she's now stuck here. So I was only just talking to her today up there, and she was just saying she just doesn't know what she would do without this kind of service, because she needs to be able to report back to an office in Australia. She's still working remotely from Ireland to Sydney. So we have a little international element as well, which is nice.
Yeah, I get it. So these are maybe the people that we don't hear about. The people who have been stranded, but yet still have to maintain all of their commitments that they might have had at the other side of the world. I really hope that lady doesn't have pets or pets or plants.
She has her boyfriend left over there. The poor thing.
Doesn't it say a lot about me that I only thought of pets and plants? But we shouldn't. Obviously, I don't mean to trivialize it, because these are really real concerns that people have. And, unfortunately, this week in particular, it feels like we've taken a step backwards. But for me, what I'm really interested in terms of the hubs, and, our previous guest, Rose Barrett from Grow Remote, talked to us about the hub and spoke model and why that's important. And we've commented that the conversation around remote work and what it will be going forward, and what services will be needed to support that conversation is really only starting.
Absolutely,
at the moment, everything, we're really just responding, and so it's great that operators like yourself are available and you are responding to what people need in the moment. But in terms of your long-term plan for space at Venture House, where do you see the real demand is going to come from, and what do you think your makeup of members is going to be after the pandemic?
Well, just as you're saying things like that, Ireland is not set up for rural working and for rural hubs. For years, everyone has been kind of shuttled into the main cities, and people have been doing the 2-hour commute in and out of Dublin every day, and we're kind of almost pre-programmed into that. And such a lovely positive side of this pandemic, which is awful, don't get me wrong, is that people are really valuing their life outside of work now. And they're maybe thinking, maybe I don't want to drive for 2 hours anymore. I don't want to do that kind of thing. But as you said, the setup is not really there. So when we were starting and we refurbished the whole building, we got a gorgeous colour scheme, fitted it out. But then we realised we had no fibre broadband in our area. There was no kind of signs of us going to be getting it in the next 2 years. So obviously that's the integral part of this working. So we had to go off and find our own broadband provider. So we spoke with the county council, we spoke with AIR, with various different people. And that was kind of the biggest challenge, was making sure that people could really actually do their job, connect into their head offices, video conference across the world if they needed to. All that kind of stuff needed to be thought about before we could even, open anything. So that was probably the biggest thing, which would be similar to your guys in Grow,
Yeah, but did you get that sorted?
We did. So we ended up going with a company called Regional Broadband, who were really, really helpful. And they had worked on a few hubs like ours before, and they said, this is how you get it in. But it was like, that was probably our biggest cost of starting up. We had to bring the dishes in, we had to find everything, wire it down, wire up all the desks, everything like that. So it was a really big undertaking, but I'm delighted we did it, because the second we had the internet in, we could get people in the door, and really start to help people.
Lauren, that's something that actually I hadn't considered in terms of remote working, because there's almost an assumption now that broadband is widely available. And by the way, I'm less than half an hour from the city centre, and my broadband is not great. Whereas when I travel to the west of Ireland over to Connemara, there's excellent broadband there. So, there's some real contradictions in terms of our broadband rollout in Ireland. But it occurs to me then that does this actually present an opportunity for you? Because if people locally in their homes can't access high quality fibre broadband, then surely that's an offering that you have, maybe that they would otherwise need to travel
Absolutely,
for?
Yeah. Sometimes I get people calling me at, let's say, 7:30 in the morning, and they'll just be having an absolute panic attack, saying they need to be on this Teams meeting in an hour. Yeah. And that's just the end of it. They must be in attendance for this. They've no broadband, their broadband is down, their usage is up, whatever. And that's where we can really come in and be, a bit of a cornerstone in the community, that people know we're there, we're reliable, we're always going to be open for them. They can come in and out, rent it for, we try to do a week's rental, but if someone is stuck, we're never going to say don't come in, that kind of thing. But really kind of the three main reasons I have people coming to me are really, really, really bad internet, which happens in the countryside. Yeah. Maybe their kids are home from school and they just can't focus. And then the work-life balance. People are on their computers until 10 p.m. at night, and they just can't separate their work life, at all.
Yeah, and look, that's such a common. I'm not even going to say complaint. It's actually a growing area of concern for employers, for their employees' well-being. And one of the things I'm starting to see is a lot more of little notes at the bottom of emails saying, if this arrives outside of your designated time, please don't feel the need to respond and things. So there's definitely awareness around it. And, it's interesting. I think busy home lives and that quest to regain some work-life balance, they're definitely two drivers that we've seen speaking to numerous hubs right around the country, including up and down the Wild Atlantic Way. Really bad internet actually, hasn't really been a feature, but yet I can see how that would be a massively important one for you. And by the way, it's worth explaining for people who aren't familiar with, I introduced Space Adventure House in Crookstown in Kildare, but there may be people who don't know where that is, and think that all of Kildare looks like Naas or Selbridge or Maynooth. But of course, Crookstown is South Kildare. So, the nearest town. So what would be the nearest large town to you,
I
Lauren?
suppose, so we're located just off the M9 motorway. So we're kind of 15 minutes from Naas, 15 minutes from Carlow, to put it in kind of easy terms. So we're very much rural, but we have, where we're located on site, we have a great amount of amenities around us. So we're just behind a Texaco service station. So that kind of draws a lot of people into the area. It's a super busy site. And we thought it was really important when we were opening as well. Like when I was working in Dublin, I love to go off at lunch, get my nails done, or if I needed to drop my car in to get it, checked before my NCT, I wanted to be able to do all these things. And we have all these facilities around us on site here. So we have a clothes shop, a beauticians, a gym, all those things, that we're still rural, but you have all the advantages of working in a city, let's call it.
Yeah, do you know, Lauren, that just shows that you're coming from a rural perspective there, because you listed things like shops and beauty salon and the gyms, but actually you never mentioned that there's lots of free parking. That's such a novelty for people.
I suppose that really kind of divides us away from the other co-working spaces that are around Kildare. There's not a whole lot of us, but the other guys, you have to pay for the parking outside, or some of them are really, really in the sticks with nothing around them. So, you know, you need to have a balance of, you need to have a regular life as well as, you know, the savings that come from working in a rural setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, you're well placed there. You know, you're speaking to members in terms of. By the way, are you doing a membership drive? Are you taking on new members, or are you at capacity?
No, I'm not at capacity. So I have about 10 full-time people at the moment, and then I have others who come in for, let's say, a week here and there. So I'm not at capacity at the moment, but I'm kind of in the process. I'm working with the local enterprise office in Kildare, and just looking at getting a bit of a grant to kind of divide some of the spaces up into more private offices. And we're also refurbishing the full front of the building, because we're located in a business park, so we don't have the most attractive front door. So we're completely renovating all of that in the next month or two, which is going to be great. And local enterprise office have been fantastic helping us with things like that as well. So no, we're not completely fully booked yet, but we're getting there. By the end of November, I'm hoping I will be, yeah.
Very good. And the calls that you're getting in, are they, again, is it mixed? Because it's really interesting to hear you've got a student. But actually, now that you've explained the local internet situation, having a student there who's trying to access courses online makes perfect sense. It's just something that we haven't heard another hub talk about. So that's an interesting one. But I mean, look, obviously we're in our second lockdown now. Have you businesses and members who are essential services that they've needed to stay open?
No, I don't have anybody kind of that, let's say, is an essential service per se, but everybody still needed to be able to go to work. Everybody needed to be able to conference into their head offices. So everybody's still working away, and we're really fortunate. We're 5,000 square feet, so we can really spread people out, even with, you know, the lockdown measures. And the only thing that has really affected us is we have quite a large conference area, and we've meeting rooms that we can kind of rent out separately. So obviously they can't happen now, but all of our sharers are still able to, you know, work away, which is great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Lauren, I'm delighted to hear that things are going well. It's a great service for people, particularly as you said, you're just located off the M9. So, you know, approximately halfway between Carlow and Naas, but you're obviously quite close to Athy as well. So well located there. And now that we've heard about the struggles that people are having with internet, I'm sure that this will become a more attractive option for them. So, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today and talking to us about Space Adventure House. And again, this is a conversation that we're going to return to. So, Lauren, take care of your members, and we'll certainly touch base in a few months' time to see how all of that is going. We need to take a quick break now. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or by email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. So I'm now joined by Caroline Hickey, co-owner of M Space in Malahide. Caroline, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to be talking to you because you're one of the new co-working spaces or hubs. And when I say new, you know, 12, 15 months, but you're one of the hubs that we're hopefully going to see this remote working policy work through. So I'm really excited to reach out and to make contact with hubs right across Ireland. Earlier this summer, we had the opportunity to travel along the Wild Atlantic Way and meet some of the hubs along there. And we know that there's a collection of hubs along the Atlantic Financial Corridor or Economic Corridor. So it's really interesting to see where these hubs turn up. But let's start by maybe talking just about M Space in Malahide. You are the co-owner. Who is the other co-owner?
My sister, Barbara Nolan.
Oh, very good. And how did you come to? Were you in this? Were you in this industry prior to establishing M Space?
No, so our background is actually in commercial property. So we had a family business that we ran with our father for 18 or 19 years. And we managed our buildings and all the tenants and leases. And it was a traditional office type of setup. And we had a unit in one of our buildings that we found it really difficult to rent. It had been rented out to British Airways for 15 years, and then they moved to East Point, and we just couldn't rent it. It was too big for some people and too small for other people. And then we just came up with the idea that, God, I think a co-working space in Malahide could work really well. And we set it up. So we set it up last August 2019, and we have 19 desks basically, and we have a meeting room that all our members have complimentary use of, and we have one private office that holds 4 people that's rented to a company, and then with the rest of it is open plan with dedicated desks and people that come in for daily or hot desks, that type of thing.
Oh, very good. You opened, was it summer last year that you opened?
Yes, August 2019.
So long before COVID started to have the impact of that started to be felt. So this was a former British Airways
head office.
Head office. Oh, very good.
Yeah.
At the time, I know there has been a new place opened since, but at the time, was this the first co-working space to be opened in Malahide?
There was another one down in the marina, and then since March of this year, then a very big one then opened also in Malahide. So we set up like August of last year, and we were building it up slowly as you do, and we were building up the community and trying to get our name out there, and then COVID kicked in then obviously in March, then we had to close. So from the background that we'd had before, we had never done any networking or social media or anything like this. So from January of this year, this is the first time that we'd ever done anything like this before. So we're actually loving the whole networking element of it and how good people are with their time and expertise. I mean, it's amazing. So we've spent an awful lot of time with that.
That's really interesting because you've come from the property industry, so you weren't a newcomer to this industry doing it. So I think it's interesting when you talk about embracing networking and social media and all forms of online networking, because that's something we advocate through Property District on a daily basis, and we have been advocating for that for many years. And there has traditionally been a little bit of reluctance or hesitancy shown by the industry, and it's so interesting to see that being overcome just since February and March of this year, as the pandemic really started to be felt. And indeed, I learned about your new facility through social media, so we know that it works as a communication tool. Yeah. So that was actually the genesis of this conversation. But I think it's really interesting because this is just one in a whole series of changes that have happened in how people, during the habits that people have, how they're going about their daily private and professional lives. You're obviously dealing with members coming in here. What have you experienced? By the way, are you in lockdown at the moment?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Okay, very good. But when you were open, what were you experiencing in terms of your members?
Well, it's funny because the whole mindset has completely changed. So when we opened in August last year, so from August to January, we were pushing the whole time with our new found love of social media and networking, that we were pushing as much as we could about getting the work-life balance, getting rid of the commuting, all that type of stuff. And that was working to somewhat for some people that didn't want to go into town anymore. But then since COVID, we don't have to sell that anymore because, everybody has had to, reconfigure themselves to work from home, and nobody wants to be going back into town. And so we didn't have to sell the benefit of having a mix of both. So since we've come back in since whatever June or July that it was, the new members that we've got coming in are buying. We have bundles that we do 5 and 10 day bundles where they can use the bundles over a certain number of weeks, and they come into us say for 1, 2 or 3 days a week, and then they work from home the other 2 days. So they're getting a mix of both, and they're loving coming in to us because they say, God, I get so much done. There's no distractions at home. We've one guy in there at the moment that is getting a huge job done in his house, and he said to me, like, I'm pulling my hair out. I have to come down here and because the workers are in our house, and it's just this lovely different stories. Another lady that's in there that's got a 14-month-old baby, and she said, I come down here for 2 days a week, and if I do nothing else for the rest of the week, I know I have those 2 days and I can get so much done. So I just think people really are enjoying it. Most of our members walk or cycle to work, so they're like, God, it's just this is brilliant. So that's a big change.
I think the conversation around work from home has just changed so much from the early days to kind of saying, can we do this, to then moving to, yes, we can, and it's great and we love it. And then suddenly it moved really quite quickly into, this is never ending. There's no break between home and work. There's no space between back-to-back Zoom meetings and Microsoft Team calls and whatever else that it is. That actually, I think burnout found people quite quickly.
Absolutely,
and that's probably due to a combination of factors, not just the back-to-back Zoom calls, although I do think Zoom fatigue is a very real thing.
Totally.
But I think that even, the general stress and the general worry and general air of anxiety that only a pandemic can bring, that's surely attributing to our mental state.
Totally.
But one of the things we found, though, was from September, there seemed to be a real shift in people's attitude that, fair enough, they didn't want to commute and they didn't feel the need to travel an hour and a half to a headquarters. But that didn't necessarily mean that working from home was the right solution.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that there's a big difference between working from home or doing remote work, because it was fine when we were in the lockdown the first time. You couldn't barely leave your house and you just had to, have your laptop on the ironing board in your bedroom and you just had to get on with it. But now the companies are taking the decision not to go back to the offices. You really have to be set up properly. You can't be constantly sitting at your kitchen table. So that's why the shift that we have found is the mix of both. So so people do come in, now we have people that are there all the time as well, like they're dedicated and they're there Monday to Friday, but they just, not everybody is set up, not everybody has a space in your house to set up an office. So I think the hubs in the suburbs and stuff definitely are really an added bonus to people, and most of the people that we have are working for themselves. Actually, they're not working for big companies. I know. Yes.
That's an interesting one, because that's something that I maybe wouldn't have been as I suppose in my naivety or lack of knowing any better, I would have assumed that co-working spaces were for entrepreneurs or small businesses. I suppose I hadn't fully considered, certainly this time last year, that so many people would choose this as an alternative to working in the company headquarters or working from home. And I just hadn't really seen that as a strong part of the market. So when you started out last year and when you were putting together the business model for M Space, did you envisage that it would be mainly entrepreneurs, or were you thinking of saving people the commute in and out of the city 5 days a week?
We thought it was going to be both, because we did actually approach quite a lot of big companies and they didn't really bite at the chance of doing it. Now I know they were doing it in very big buildings in town and stuff, where they're taking floors in these places, but we actually didn't get anybody from a big company. We have got people that are a lot of startups, and I mean, we've got people that are in there at the moment, or before this latest restrictions, that are starting up on their own, and they've a full office at home, but they just find coming into a place like this just makes you feel like, I get up, I get dressed, put a bit of makeup on, I go down, I feel like as if I can talk to some people, have a coffee, walk down to the village. It just feels like they're not totally on their own, because it's very isolating sitting, even though they're sitting there on their own, if you know what I mean, but there's other people around. It's a total different shift. And we thought initially when we first started that we'd get in some of these big companies and they would take a couple of desks and they would roster them out to various people and keep using the desks, but it didn't turn out that way for us. Ours turned out more startups, people that had offices in town that didn't want to be in town anymore, but predominantly they were their own boss. And then quite a lot of startups. So, yeah.
Are you seeing any shift now? I mean, are you doing a new members drive? Are you taking on new members at the moment?
Just before this restrictions, yeah. So we opened, so we really felt it was starting to pick up again since September. I suppose when the kids went back and reality was kicking in that this is all our new norm. And we got new members in. So instead of, people didn't want to be tied down to being there Monday to Friday and having to pay a monthly fee. So we set up this thing called a 5 or 10 day bundle. And I know a lot of places do this type of thing. And it was just more for flexibility, because not like one size doesn't fit all. So because we'd come from a commercial background, we knew how to work with tenants. We know that every lease is not the same for every single person, and people have got different scenarios for their businesses. And we always worked with our tenants. So the bundles are working really well. And we are launching a virtual business address as well, because there's plenty of people that are sitting in their kitchen starting up their own business, but they don't want to have their home address. So we're launching that. And then Malahide is a huge push on at the moment now, since the latest restrictions about shop local. And I know the whole country is behind this now, and keep the money in the economy. If you're going to spend, please spend locally and try and get these places back up and running. So we're going to launch, why not buy a bundle for your dad or your mom who's pulling their hair out working at home, and come down to us for a couple of days a week, in January. And so we're going to launch that now next week. So it's that type of thing that we're trying to build up now for the next, 5 or 6 weeks, and get a bit better at social media and, that type of thing. So.
Caroline, isn't it interesting that, how things have changed so much in the 15 months since you opened, and yet now you might just be the solution that not just startups need, but also larger businesses. But in relation to startups, we're not hearing a lot about new startups coming out of the pandemic, although I've no doubt that there will be a wave, whether it's just a wave of people who have realigned their priorities or have had an idea to actually, develop a pandemic responsive solution, or whether they've just been let go from their current positions. Are you speaking to many startups that have established since March?
2 or 3 people that we have in there at the moment started kind of in February, and then March happened, and they've just been working on content and websites, and like we've got people in there that were coaches, we've other people that are, marketing strategists, that type of thing. And they're just trying to keep going. But because everything is virtual now, and, the stuff that we were doing over the pandemic that everybody was doing, we were on Zooms all the time with the local enterprise board. I was on, listening to one with yourself and through the Iconic offices. And some of the stuff was just amazing, and I'd never had that before, so it was very inspiring to keep going, because there's so many people out there willing to help you, and even all the grants that everybody's getting now, and it's just it was definitely a good time to keep going. And because it was so virtual, you could work on your website, and you could do all your content planning that you want to do for certain stuff, and then when the time is appropriate, launch your business. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. It became a little bit of a cliche over the last number of months, but there was genuinely a sense that we're all in this together, and I think that sense has really prevailed, and now we're seeing it translate into supporting local retailers and shopping locally for Christmas. And so while there have been so many negative things have happened over the last number of months, there have definitely been some positives, and they've really been the triumph of human nature. And we're seeing that in local areas. So that's why in one way, I'm not surprised to see that goodwill coming in for local business. And, essentially villages like Malahide have always had that at their core, and maybe it got a little bit diluted as lives got busier. But it's good to see that there's been a real movement towards regaining that. And so as a local business, I can only imagine that you're well placed to support and facilitate that through your members and through the local retailers.
Exactly. And there really is a push now, because, obviously pretty much the whole village had to close down like every other village, and everyone is just like, you can click and collect, you can order online, you can buy vouchers, you can do there's just so many things that everybody can do to help each other. And it's so funny that you said we're all in this together. I have that written on a sheet in front of me here, because that is our motto. At the moment, it's 100%. And,
sometimes people forget that a cliche is a cliche for a reason. And I saw it across the construction sector massively. We've seen it across all sectors, really, that, there is this, it's a unifying force if we allow it to be. If we don't allow it to become a divisive one, that actually, even though it's not a positive one, it is a unifying one, and that's something to build on. But Caroline, best of luck to both yourself and Barbara in building out M Space in Malahide, and indeed to the members who come in to join you. You might just share your website details, so if there's anybody in Malahide that actually needs this type of solution, they'll be able to contact you easily.
Yes, so our website is mspace.ie.
Super, that's great. That was Caroline Hickey, co-owner of M Space Malahide. Again, my thanks for Caroline and to all of our guests today. That's it from us. Thank you for listening in to Property Matters on Dublin South FM. You can get in touch with the show on social media at iProperty Radio, or by emailing hello@ipropertyradio.com. Also, my thanks as always to Peter Rice on sound, to show producer Katie Talon of Hear Me Roar Media. We're back at the same time next week. From myself, Carol Talon, and all the team here, stay safe.